This episode is sponsored by Storyblocks. With Storyblocks, you have unlimited access to studio quality stock video. You can check out more in the link below. Hey guys, and welcome to This Is Now. The Switch Lite comes out today and is expected to be a big hit. But what about some of Nintendo's not so big hits? After selling over 100 million units, I don't think anyone can argue that the Wii was not one of the most popular consoles ever made. The Wii U, on the other hand, not quite so much. Nintendo only managed to sell around 14 million consoles during the Wii U's 5-year lifespan. To put that in context, that is less than the PS4 sells every year. A big reason for that was the marketing. Customers were confused on what exactly a Wii U even was. Was it a new console? Was it an add-on for the existing Wii? Tons of people really weren't sure. And the implementation of the touchpad didn't help either. For starters, it seemed like a big step back from the full motion controls of the Wii. Dual screen gaming worked well enough for the DS, but that was when those screens were right next to each other. A lot of people just felt like it was a cumbersome thing to try to incorporate, including Nintendo. The only game that really properly took advantage of the gamepad was maybe Super Mario Maker and I guess Mario Party, but
I kind of like playing as Bowser on the gamepad for Mario Party. Like you could kind of you cheated during the game. I thought that was fun.
Matt, I'm not surprised that you enjoy Bowser. That sounds exactly right. On top of all of that, the console itself was just plain underpowered, especially considering that it barely was better than like an Xbox 360 or PS3, even though it came out right before the PS4 came out. So while there wasn't a whole lot of third-party support for the Wii U, it really wasn't even powerful enough to run most of those major games that were on this new generation of consoles, and thus it failed to catch on with most gamers. Although the good thing is that all of the best Wii U games are now on the Switch, so you don't have to go back and play it. You can just play the Switch Lite. The Nintendo DS is another example of a super popular console that was marred by the launch of its successor. Now don't get me wrong, after 8 years, the 3DS is a very popular console with a bunch of cool special editions and a massive catalog of games. However, when it first launched, it was a pretty hard sell. The promise of true 3D gaming without the need for any type of glasses was a cool gimmick, but that was just the problem. It was pretty much just a gimmick and kind of a bad one at that. The 3D imagery was blurry, it made the already low resolution gaming seem even worse, and personally, I always left it off. In fact, that's one of the reasons why if I'm ever going to play a 3DS game these days, I use the new 2DS XL. Because who needs 3D anyway? I mean, a number of people complained that the 3D was giving them headaches, and just like me, turned off the 3D function altogether. Now considering that all of this happened when the 3DS launched at a whopping $250, especially when you consider it didn't have the 3D, it was just a very expensive DS. Now the sales in those early days were pretty bad until they did give it a pretty sizable price cut down from $250 to I believe $170, and then people realized that they couldn't play the latest generation of Pokemon. Although fun fact, because the 3DS didn't sell well, they continued to make Pokemon games for the DS for several years into the 3DS's life cycle. Speaking of terrible 3D, how can we talk about weird failed products and not mention the biggest flop of all? The Virtual Boy. It was also marketed as having cutting-edge 3D virtual reality graphics. And while it did have some 3D stereoscopic graphics, it definitely wasn't VR, and it was anything but cutting edge. In fact, the graphics were closer to those cheap single-game toys versus the Virtual Boy's cousin, the Super Nintendo. Most games like Mario Clash even played more like the NES games, when you consider that this had pretty much only a single color, red. Yes, my friends, it wasn't like the 4 colors of the Game Boy or the 16 bits or the 8 bits or anything like that of the actual home consoles. This just had red and black. Supposedly, Nintendo looked into adding full color, but that would have brought the already high price of the console to over $700. So you get red and black and your fake VR headset.
It was still really expensive at like $180.
On top of all of that, the Virtual Boy made people sick. Now VR today, even with its high resolution and high frame rates, can still make people nauseous, but the Virtual Boy caused blurred vision, headaches, and nausea to the point where several games even came with an option to automatically pause every 15 minutes to prevent strain. Now unsurprisingly, a console with subpar graphics and outdated games didn't really sell all that well, especially considering that it would make you sick. In total, the Virtual Boy only sold around 770,000 units. I'm pretty sure all of those units are now being used as set dressing for hip YouTubers.
Where do you think I got that one?
Now Nintendo has had some super crazy peripherals throughout the years. I'm not even talking about the obvious ones like the N64 Gamecube controllers. Handhelds have always been very popular for Nintendo, so it is no surprise that they've tried to capitalize even more on those platforms. And while loot boxes in gaming have been a buzzworthy topic that we've done an entire episode on, it turns out that companies like EA and 2K are way late to the party. Some games might have loot boxes, but back in 2001, Nintendo had the e-reader.
New e-reader for Game Boy Advance. Slide the cards to play some of your favorite games.
The e-reader plugged into the cartridge slot of the Game Boy Advance. Now players could buy booster packs which contained 5 e-cards, which then could be scanned to unlock secret levels, power-ups, like special trader battles in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, and items for your town in Animal Crossing. Now of course, Pokemon trading cards were absolutely booming in 2001, so it seemed natural to start integrating those cards with the e-reader. For a very short time, Nintendo and Wizards of the Coast, who developed the Pokemon trading card game, integrated e-reader support on the Pokemon cards, which was kind of cool. I definitely had a lot of those Pokemon cards. But the thing was, even though it was cool, they actually didn't do that much. Like usually when you swipe them, it would just give you like a little Pokedex entry or something.
Yeah, pretty much.
The cards themselves use a special type of barcode called a dot code, which actually contained all of the data for the content as opposed to unlocking something already programmed in the game. Now ultimately, the e-reader didn't catch on because of how slow and inconsistent scanning cards actually was. I mean, each card had to be scanned twice, once on both sides, and very slowly. It was properly slow. Now it was very cool tech, but the e-reader is also prone to unexpected errors, which just frustrated users, and Nintendo scrapped it only a few years later. At which point I bought it, as well as a bunch of cards for super cheap. Before the NES blew up, it came with a unique little robotic operating buddy, also known as Rob, or that one character that you've played in Smash that you don't actually remember where it came from. Now after the great Atari crash in 1983, the US market was not interested in video games. So in order to sell units, Nintendo marketed the NES as a quote, entertainment system, aka a toy, as opposed to a video game. Rob connected to the system and allowed players to interact with him, but it actually only worked for 2 games, Gyromite and Stack Up. Once the NES started gaining popularity as an actual video game console, Rob was discontinued, and of course most people just know him as the weird robot who's really annoying in Smash Brothers. Now the Power Glove was another ill-fated NES accessory. While it looked super cool in Fred Savage's The Wizard, the Power Glove was an infamously bad piece of hardware. Nintendo touted that after you placed the bulky sensors on your TV and manually programmed the game code into the glove every time, you would have the ability to use motion gestures. Except none of that worked, at all. Nintendo was criticized for sticking with game cartridges for the N64 because of their limited ROM. Now they had partnered with Sony to create the CD-based Nintendo PlayStation, something I feel like my mom would have said when I was a kid, which you actually can check out an entire video on here, but ultimately the 2 companies had a falling out, resulting in the Sony PlayStation that we all know and love. When the Nintendo 64 cartridges were maxed out by developers, Nintendo released the 64DD attachment, which allowed people to use CDs on the N64. Awesome, great, right? Well, no. So the DD was actually originally a developer tool that they sort of rushed out, and unfortunately Nintendo opted to use magnetic CDs instead of optical, which didn't really hold that much more storage than the cartridges, so it kind of defeated the purpose. In their first attempt at multi-screen gaming, Nintendo released the Game Boy Advance Gamecube link cable, which on paper would use your Game Boy as a controller with a second screen with helpful information such as maps, very similar to the Wii U. However, like with all these products, there was very little support for it. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles was hyped up as the return of the Final Fantasy franchise to Nintendo, but players were required to have a Game Boy and link cable for each player, which was an expensive buzzkill. Although, I did used to play with, you could trade from the Pokemon Coliseum to Ruby and Sapphire using that cable, which was very cool.
That's pretty much all anyone actually ended up using.
Yeah. Lastly, Nintendo has had some weird partnerships outside of the gaming world, like the Game Boy Pocket, Sonar, which was a legitimate fish finding attachment for the original Game Boy, for actual fishing.
Yeah.
Additionally, there have been multiple attempts to integrate the world of textiles into the Nintendo ecosystem, with the Nintendo Knitting Machine for NES and the Singer Isaac attachment for the Game Boy. I can't even believe I'm saying this right now. But both let you design and I guess knit patterns right on your Nintendo console. Speaking of knitting and Nintendo consoles, our sponsor for today's video, Storyblocks. So we actually use Storyblocks for all of our B-roll needs on the show. And with Storyblocks, you can download anything from audio, video, and even After Effects templates. Look at these videos. And this one. Look at that one. All of these are clips we've used on This Is videos that we got from Storyblocks. There are no monthly limits to what you can download, and everything is royalty-free for personal and commercial use, including YouTube. The best part is they are constantly adding new content, so there's always something to fit your project. Now, we personally could not do This Is without Storyblocks because we legitimately use so much stock footage in these videos. So if you guys want to know more information, definitely be sure to go check out the link below at storyblocks.com/AustinEvans. And of course, huge shout out to Storyblocks for sponsoring This Is, our very first This Is sponsor.
Yay!
We get to keep the lights on now. Thank you very much for watching this episode of This Is. Make sure to subscribe to Matt's Face. He has a wonderful channel which is all about his wonderful drawings. And give him some positive encouragement, because unlike usually when I make fun of him in these outros, Matt's a great guy.